All right, so as we said in the last video, the banking crisis was only the first episode in a long and arduous journey back to recovery through the New Deal. And so let's take a look at some of the other provisions passed during this bit of legislation. So the Emergency Banking Act was, like I say, only the first of an unprecedented flurry of legislation during the first 3 months of FDR's administration, often referred to as the 100 Days. The centerpiece of Roosevelt's plan for combating the Depression was called the National Industrial Recovery Act, and it was to a large extent modeled on the government-business partnership that was established by the War Industry Board during the First World War. This act established the National Recovery Administration. Now, this organization or this government agency featured the same kind of business-government cooperation that characterized the War Industries Board during the First World War, and it was empowered to write industry codes that would govern output, prices, and working conditions, among other things. The invention of this agency basically repudiated the dominant idea of liberty in the 20s that the best way to encourage economic activity and ensure a fair distribution of wealth was to allow market competition to operate unrestrained by government. Instead, with the National Recovery Administration, or the NRA, we are introducing restraint, government restraint on business. The NIRA, National Industrial Recovery Act, also included in it Clause 7A, which recognized labor's right to organize and was used to win support from labor, and also represented another sharp departure from the policies of the 1920s, which advocated for open shop. Now, the aims of this was first and foremost to restore economic vitality and stability to the national economy and to create some kind of peace between labor and management. Now, we do move very quickly to establish codes and set standards for production, prices, and wages in particularly big industries like textile, steel, mining, and auto. But the law very quickly became mired in controversy. Large corporations became dominant features in the NRA boards, and they used that dominance to drive up prices, limit production, and lay off workers. They also divided the markets among themselves, often at the expense of smaller competitors. The law was also somewhat weakly enforced and therefore minimally effective. It neither produced economic recovery, nor did it particularly produce peace between employers and workers. It did, however, combat the pervasive sense that government was not doing anything to deal with the crisis that was characteristic of Hoover's response to the Great Depression. Another part of the 100 Days legislation was bringing the government into providing relief directly to those in need. Now, Roosevelt and his advisors shared a fear that widespread direct government payments to the unemployed would undermine individual self-reliance. And instead, he preferred to create government jobs. Now, with nearly a quarter of the workforce unemployed, spending money on relief was unavoidable. But like I say, he didn't want to make direct payments to people. Instead, he preferred to provide jobs. So a little bit of direct relief was unfortunately inevitable. Under the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, created in May of 1933, grants were made to local agencies that would aid the impoverished. But most of the agencies Roosevelt created in this period revolved around creating jobs. The Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, employed young men to work on projects like forest preservation, food control, and improvement of national parks. The Public Works Administration, or the PWA, built was part of the National Industrial Recovery Act, and directed the Secretary of the Interior to build roads, schools, hospitals, and other public facilities, thereby needing to hire workers to do that. The Civil Works Administration was established in January of 1934, and it employed more than 4 million people in the construction of highways, tunnels, courthouses, airports, and various other public buildings and services. It, however, was dissolved due to complaints that it was creating a class of Americans permanently dependent on government jobs. Another part of this relief package was the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA, which built a series of dams to prevent floods and deforestation along the Tennessee River, and as an added bonus, provided cheap electrical power for homes and factories in that region, which still largely lived in isolated log cabins. Now, the needs of these programs, or rather the aims of these programs, were straightforward. Some of them, like the Federal Emergency Relief Administration, provided direct relief to the needy. Others provided public employment and improvement of the nation's infrastructure, things like the CCC, the PWA, the CWA, and the TVA. The TVA also was responsible for expanding electrical power to people who needed it. On the whole, millions of Americans participated in these programs, and they saw widespread relief as a result of it. But we also see, as a result of all this, some emerging opposition to Roosevelt's programs, which is something we'll get to in just a moment. In our next video, we're going to switch gears and look at how Roosevelt dealt with the problems in agriculture. Because if you remember from our lectures before the break, the Depression was already being felt by the agricultural sector as early as 1925. And so dealing with the agricultural depression is going to be a big part of Roosevelt's program. And we'll see how he dealt with that next.